The courtroom was silent, except for the rustle of papers as Dr. Catherine Morrison adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and opened the thick manila folder in front of her. My mother, sitting 3 rows behind me, had gone completely pale. For 26 years, she had convinced everyone, family, friends, doctors, even me at times, that I was mentally unstable. Today, that carefully constructed lie was about to crumble. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Sarah Chen Williams, and this is the story of how a mandatory psychiatric evaluation meant to prove my incompetence instead exposed my mother's decades of manipulation, gaslighting, and calculated cruelty. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in my cramped studio apartment in downtown Portland. I was 26, working as a freelance graphic designer, struggling to make ends meet, but finally, for the first time in my life, feeling like I could breathe. I had been living independently for 8 months, away from my mother's suffocating control, and despite the financial challenges, I was happier than I had ever been. My phone buzzed at exactly 7:23 a.m. The number was blocked, but I recognized the rhythm of the rings. 3 short bursts, then silence, then 3 more. It was my mother's calling pattern when she was particularly agitated. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Sarah, thank God!" came the voice of Linda Chen Williams, my 48-year-old mother, dripping with the false concern that had manipulated so many people over the years. "I've been worried sick about you. Your Aunt Rachel said she saw you at the grocery store last week talking to yourself in the cereal aisle. Honey, this behavior is getting worse." I pressed my fingers against my temples, feeling the familiar tension headache that always accompanied conversations with my mother. "Mom, I was reading a shopping list out loud. That's not talking to myself, that's being organized." "Sweetheart, denial is part of the illness. I've been reading about it online and all the symptoms match. The isolation, the paranoid thoughts about our family, the inability to maintain steady employment." "I'm freelancing by choice," I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I told you I'm building my own business. I have 3 regular clients now and living in that tiny apartment, barely eating proper meals, staying up all night on that computer. It's not normal, Sarah. Healthy people don't live like this." The accusation hit like a physical blow because it contained just enough distorted truth to make me question myself. Yes, I worked late hours because freelance deadlines were unpredictable. Yes, my apartment was small because it was what I could afford on my inconsistent income. Yes, I had been eating more takeout than home-cooked meals because I was putting every spare minute into building my client base. But my mother had a way of taking these normal challenges of young adult independence and twisting them into evidence of mental illness. She had been doing it for as long as I can remember, and the really insidious part was how she did it with such apparent love and concern that even I sometimes wondered if she was right. "I have to go, Mom. I have a client meeting this morning." "With who?" The question came fast and sharp. "What company? What's the person's name? When did you schedule this meeting?" The interrogation was automatic, a reflex born of years of practice. She needed details so she could verify, investigate, and potentially undermine. But I had learned to be vague. "A local business. I'll call you later." "Sarah, wait!" I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. My hands were shaking, and I realized I had been holding my breath. This was the effect my mother had on me, even from a distance. 8 months of independence, 8 months of slowly building confidence and self-trust, and one phone call could still reduce me to a trembling mess. The client meeting was real. A small organic coffee shop downtown wanted a new logo and website design. The owner, Marcus Webb, was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had recently left his corporate job to follow his passion for sustainable coffee sourcing. He was exactly the kind of client I loved working with. Clear vision, reasonable budget, and most importantly, he treated me like a competent professional. We spent 2 hours discussing his brand identity, color schemes, and target demographic. I felt confident, articulate, creative. This was who I was when I wasn't under my mother's influence. Capable, talented, and absolutely not crazy. But as I walked back to my apartment, my phone turned back on and immediately buzzed with 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My heart sunk as I scrolled through them. The calls were from my mother, my Aunt Rachel, my cousin Jennifer, and my grandmother, my mother's mother, Eleanor Chen, an 80-year-old woman who had always been my mother's most devoted enabler. The text messages painted a picture of escalating family hysteria. Mom, 9:15 a.m. Sarah isn't answering her phone. I'm worried she's having an episode. Aunt Rachel, 9:22 a.m. Should we call the police for a wellness check?
I think we need to consider intervention options. She hung up on me and won't respond to calls. Cousin Jennifer, 9:45 a.m. Mom says Sarah is getting worse. Maybe it's time for professional help? Grandma Eleanor, 10:15 a.m. Your mother is beside herself with worry. Please call home immediately. Mom, 10:30 a.m. I've contacted Dr. Harrison. He agrees this pattern of behavior is concerning. The mention of Dr. Harrison made my blood run cold. Dr. Timothy Harrison was my mother's longtime family physician, a man who had known me since childhood and who had always seemed to accept my mother's interpretations of my behavior without question. If she was involving him, this was escalating beyond family drama into something more serious. I called my mother back, and she answered on the first ring. Sarah, oh, thank God, I was about to call the police. Mom, I was in a business meeting. I told you I had a client meeting. For 3 hours? Sarah, you said you'd call me later and then you disappeared. This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior that has everyone worried. Everyone? Who is everyone? The family, Dr. Harrison, your old boss from the marketing firm. You called David? I was horrified. David Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was my former supervisor at a mid-sized marketing company where I had worked for 2 years before going freelance. I had left on good terms, but the idea of my mother calling him to discuss my supposed mental health was mortifying. I'm concerned about the story you told him when you quit. He said you claimed the work environment was toxic and that you felt your coworkers were undermining you. Sarah, that sounds like paranoid thinking. My chest tightened with rage and disbelief. I had indeed told David that I found the office environment challenging, but not because of paranoia. The company culture was genuinely problematic. High turnover, unclear communication, and a manager who regularly took credit for subordinates' work. Several other employees had quit around the same time I did, and David himself had acknowledged these issues during my exit interview. But my mother had taken my legitimate workplace concerns and reframed them as evidence of mental illness. Worse, she had apparently shared this interpretation with David, potentially damaging my professional reputation in a city where the creative community was relatively small. Mom, I need you to stop calling people about me. I'm an adult. I can handle my own life. But you're not handling it, sweetheart. You're isolated, you're struggling financially, and now you're having paranoid thoughts about your former workplace. These are all warning signs. Warning signs of what? I've been researching, and it could be early onset schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or severe anxiety disorder with psychotic features. The important thing is getting you help before it gets worse. The clinical terminology rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, as if she had been rehearsing this conversation. I realized this wasn't a spontaneous concern triggered by our morning phone call. This was a campaign, carefully planned and systematically executed. I'm not sick, Mom. Sick people often don't recognize they're sick. That's part of the illness. It was a perfect trap. Any denial of mental illness could be interpreted as further evidence of mental illness. Any anger or frustration at the accusation could be labeled as mood instability or aggressive behavior. Any attempt to distance myself from the family could be characterized as isolation and paranoid thinking. I want you to come home for dinner tonight. The whole family will be there. We love you, and we want to help. Who's the whole family? Your father, your grandmother, Rachel, Jennifer, and Dr. Harrison. My heart started racing. Dr. Harrison wasn't family. His presence at a family dinner could only mean one thing. This was an intervention, not a meal. I can't tonight. I have work to finish. Sarah, this isn't optional. If you don't come willingly, we'll have to consider other options. What kind of other options? Dr. Harrison mentioned that Oregon has procedures for when someone is a danger to themselves or others. If you're too ill to recognize you need help.
She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I understood the threat perfectly. She was talking about involuntary commitment, a psychiatric hold that can strip away my freedom, my independence, and quite possibly my ability to work and support myself. "I'll be there," I said quietly. "Good. Come hungry. I'm making your favorite, chicken and dumplings." She hung up, leaving me standing on a busy Portland sidewalk, surrounded by normal people, living normal lives, while my world tilted dangerously off its axis. My mother wasn't just questioning my mental health anymore. She was actively building a case against me, recruiting allies, gathering evidence, and constructing a narrative that could justify forcing me into psychiatric treatment. The most terrifying part was how reasonable she made it all sound. Concerned mother, worried about troubled daughter, family rallying to help someone who couldn't help herself, medical professional providing expert guidance. From the outside, it looked like love, but I knew better. I had lived with Linda Chen Williams for 24 years before finally escaping to my own place. I knew the difference between genuine concern and calculated control. I knew how she could take any situation and twist it to center herself as the victim or the hero. I knew how she used other people's compassion and trust to enable her need for drama and attention. What I didn't know was how to prove it. That afternoon, I sat in my small apartment, trying to work on the coffee shop logo, but my hands kept shaking every time I thought about the evening ahead. I called in sick to my part-time weekend job at a local bookstore, a decision that would later be used as evidence of my inability to maintain consistent employment. I researched Oregon's involuntary commitment laws and felt my stomach drop as I read about the process. With the right documentation and medical opinion, a person could be held for psychiatric evaluation for up to 5 days. During that time, they could lose their job, their apartment, their pets, their independence. Even if they were eventually released with a clean bill of mental health, the damage to their life could be irreversible. My phone buzzed with more messages from family members, each one escalating the tone of concern and urgency. By 4 p.m., I realized I was trapped. If I didn't show up to dinner, it would be characterized as erratic behavior and inability to maintain family relationships. If I did show up, I would be walking into what was essentially a kangaroo court where my mental health would be tried and judged by people who had already reached their verdict. But there was a third option, one that had been lurking in the back of my mind since my mother's threat about other options. If she was going to force a psychiatric evaluation anyway, maybe I could control the terms. Maybe I could choose my own doctor, present my own evidence, and turn her weapon against her. At 5:30 p.m., I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of driving to my mother's house in the suburbs,
I drove to Portland General Hospital's emergency psychiatric unit. I walked up to the reception desk, where a tired-looking woman in scrubs was typing notes into a computer. "I'd like to request a voluntary psychiatric evaluation," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked up, surprised. "Are you experiencing thoughts of harming yourself or others?" "No, but my family believes I'm mentally ill and they're threatening involuntary commitment. I want to be evaluated by an objective professional before that happens." She studied my face for a moment, then reached for a clipboard. "Have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." As I filled out the intake forms, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. I was voluntarily walking into the exact situation my mother was trying to force me into, but on my terms. For the first time in my life, I was going to be evaluated by someone who didn't know my mother, who wasn't influenced by her version of events, who would judge me based on my actual behavior and mental state rather than her carefully crafted narrative. I had no idea that this decision would uncover something far more sinister than simple family dysfunction. I had no idea that the psychiatric evaluation designed to assess my mental health would instead reveal the systematic psychological abuse I had endured for decades. I had no idea that my mother's lies were about to be exposed by the very process she had been using to silence me. The psychiatric emergency department at Portland General Hospital was nothing like the sterile, intimidating environment I had imagined. The waiting area had soft lighting, comfortable chairs in muted blues and grays, and artwork that looked like it had been chosen to calm rather than clinical efficiency. A fish tank hummed quietly in the corner, its tropical inhabitants swimming in lazy circles, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding around them. I had been waiting for 45 minutes when a woman in her early 50s approached with a warm smile and an outstretched hand. Dr. Catherine Morrison was shorter than I had expected, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a navy cardigan over her hospital scrubs and moved with unhurried confidence of someone who had spent decades putting anxious people at ease. "Sarah, I'm Dr. Morrison. Thank you for coming in today. I understand you're here for a voluntary evaluation?" Her voice was gentle but professional, with just a hint of a southern accent that made her sound like someone's favorite aunt. I stood up, suddenly self-conscious about my appearance. I had thrown on jeans and a sweater before rushing to the hospital, and my hair was probably a mess from running my hands through it during the drive. "Yes, my family thinks I'm mentally ill, and they're threatening to have me committed. I wanted to be evaluated by someone objective before that happens." She nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like a very mature and proactive approach. Would you like to come back to my office where we can talk privately?" Her office was surprisingly cozy for a hospital setting. Personal touches, family photos, a small succulent garden on the windowsill, a bookshelf filled with both medical texts and what looked like fiction novels, made the space feel more like a therapist's office than a medical facility. She gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk and settled into her own chair with a fresh legal pad. "Before we begin, I want you to understand that this is your evaluation. You came here voluntarily, which means you have control over this process. I'm not here to prove or disprove anything your family believes. I'm here to assess your current mental state and provide you with an objective professional opinion. Does that sound reasonable?"
I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Yes, that's exactly what I was hoping for. Good. Now, why don't you start by telling me what's been happening with your family? Take your time and feel free to start wherever feels most comfortable. For the next hour, I told Dr. Morrison everything. The morning phone call, the escalating text messages, the family intervention disguised as dinner, the threats of involuntary commitment. I tried to stick to facts to avoid sounding emotional or defensive, but as I spoke, I realized how insane the whole situation sounded when laid out chronologically. Dr. Morrison took notes occasionally, but mostly just listened,
asking clarifying questions that helped me organize my thoughts. She didn't interrupt or rush me, and she didn't display any of the skeptical expressions I had learned to watch for when discussing my mother with other people. "Tell me about your relationship with your mother growing up," she said when I finished describing the day's events. This was the question I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. How do you explain 24 years of subtle psychological manipulation to someone who's never lived it? How do you describe the way someone can undermine your reality while appearing to love and support you? "It's complicated," I began, then immediately winced at how cliched that sounded. "She's always been involved in my life, very involved. When I was little, I thought all mothers were like that." "Can you give me some specific examples?" I closed my eyes, trying to choose from the thousands of memories that suddenly seemed significant in this new context. When I was 12, I made the middle school soccer team. I was so excited. I'd been practicing for months. But my mom started worrying immediately about injuries, about the time commitment, about whether the other girls would accept me. She talked to the coach, the school nurse, other parents. By the end of the first week, I was so anxious about all the things that could go wrong that I quit the team. Dr. Morrison made a note. "How did your mother react when you quit?" "She was supportive, said she was proud of me for making a mature decision and recognizing my limitations. She made my favorite dinner and told everyone how brave I was for knowing when something wasn't right for me." "And how did you feel?" "Relieved, but also empty. Like I had failed at something before I even really tried. But my mom seemed so happy that I had quit, and everyone praised me for being mature, so I figured I had made the right choice." "Did this pattern repeat with other activities or interests?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Piano lessons, art classes, the debate team, my first job, my first boyfriend, my college major. Every time I showed enthusiasm for something, she would find reasons to worry. She never forbade anything outright. She was too smart for that. She would just point out all the potential problems until I talked myself out of it." As I spoke, I watched Dr. Morrison's expression carefully. She remained professionally neutral, but I caught a subtle tightening around her eyes that made me think she was hearing something familiar in my story. "What about friendships? How did your mother respond to your relationships with peers?" This was the question that opened up a floodgate of memories I had buried. She was always concerned about my friends. Jenny Patterson in elementary school was too aggressive. Maria Santos in high school was a bad influence because she got a B- in math. Ashley Thompson in college was using me because she sometimes borrowed my notes. "Did you maintain any of these friendships despite your mother's concerns?" "For a while, with some of them. But she had a way of creating problems. She would accidentally schedule family obligations during social events. She would call when she knew I was with friends claiming emergencies that always turned out to be minor issues she could have handled herself. She would ask detailed questions about what we did, who said what, whether I felt like my friends really cared about me. I paused, remembering the slow erosion of those relationships. Eventually, it became easier to just not make plans. My friends stopped inviting me to places because I canceled so often. They thought I didn't want to spend time with them, but really the emotional exhaustion of dealing with my mother's reaction to every social interaction just wasn't worth it. Dr. Morrison set down her pen and leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, I want to ask you some direct questions about your current life and mental state. I need you to be completely honest with me, even if you think the answers might sound bad or concerning. Can you do that?" I nodded, though my heart started beating faster. "Do you ever hear voices or see things that other people don't see or hear?" "No." "Do you ever have thoughts of harming yourself or others?" "No," Sometimes I fantasize about telling my mother exactly what I think of her manipulation, but that's probably normal anger, not violent thoughts. Do you use drugs or alcohol to cope with stress or emotional problems? I have maybe 1 glass of wine a week, and I've never used illegal drugs. Do you ever lose time or have periods where you can't remember what you did or where you were? No. Do you believe that people are plotting against you or trying to harm you in ways that others might consider unlikely or irrational? I hesitated on this one. My mother is definitely trying to undermine my independence and manipulate other people's perceptions of me. But I don't think that's a paranoid thinking. I think that's an accurate assessment based on her behavior. Dr. Morrison smiled slightly. That's actually a very important distinction. Tell me about your work. You mentioned you're a freelance graphic designer.
The change of subject helped me relax. Yes, I have 3 regular clients right now, a coffee shop, a small nonprofit, and a local bookstore. I'm also working on building my portfolio to attract larger contracts. How long have you been freelancing? 8 months. Before that, I worked at Morrison & Associates Marketing for 2 years. Why did you leave? I explained the toxic work environment, the management issues, and my decision to start my own business. Dr. Morrison asked detailed questions about my workflow, my client relationships, and my financial management. I realized she was assessing my ability to function independently, to make rational decisions, and to maintain professional relationships. Can you walk me through a typical day in your life? I described my routine: morning coffee while checking emails, work blocks with scheduled breaks, client communications, networking activities, household maintenance, and personal time. As I talked, I realized how normal and structured my life actually was, despite my mother's characterization of it as chaotic and unhealthy. You mentioned you live alone. How do you feel about that? I love it. For the first time in my life, I can make decisions without having to justify them to anyone. I can eat what I want, sleep when I want, work on projects that interest me, and just breathe. Do you feel isolated or lonely? Sometimes I feel lonely, but not isolated. I have professional relationships with my clients, I'm friendly with my neighbors, I volunteer at the animal shelter on weekends. I'm building the kind of life I want, which includes some solitude. My mother interprets that as isolation, but to me, it's peace. Dr. Morrison made several more notes, then looked up at me with a thoughtful expression. Sarah, based on our conversation today, I see no evidence of mental illness. You're articulate, logical, self-aware, and functioning well independently. Your perceptions of your mother's behavior seem grounded in reality, and your responses to stress appear appropriate and healthy. I felt a rush of relief so intense that tears started forming in my eyes. Really? Really. However, I am concerned about what you've described regarding your family dynamics, the pattern of behavior you've outlined, the undermining of your confidence, the isolation from support systems, the control over your decisions, and now the threats of forced psychiatric treatment. These are actually classic signs of psychological abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow. Psychological abuse. I had never thought of my mother's behavior in those terms. Manipulation, yes. Control, absolutely. But abuse seemed like such a strong word, reserved for extreme situations that were clearly harmful. I can see that surprises you, Dr. Morrison continued gently. Many people who experience psychological abuse don't recognize it as such because it often comes disguised as love and concern. The abuser doesn't hit or scream. They worry and protect and guide. They don't forbid. They just point out dangers and risks until the victim chooses to restrict their own life. I stared at her, my mind racing. But she's my mother. She loves me. I'm sure she does, in her own way. But love and abuse can coexist, especially when the abuser has their own psychological issues that they've never addressed. What your mother is doing to you, attempting to control your life through threats of psychiatric commitment, is a severe form of emotional abuse.
Dr. Morrison reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a pamphlet titled Recognizing Psychological Abuse in Family Relationships. She handed it to me along with a business card. I want you to read this when you get home. I also want you to consider seeing a therapist who specializes in family trauma. The number on that card is for Dr. Jennifer Walsh. She's excellent, and she has experience with cases like yours. Cases like mine? Adult children of psychologically abusive parents who are trying to establish independence. It's more common than you might think. I looked down at the pamphlet, my hands shaking slightly. What happens now? My family is expecting me at dinner tonight. They think I'm having a mental breakdown. That's entirely up to you. You're an adult, you're mentally competent, and you have every right to refuse that dinner invitation. You also have every right to cut contact with family members who are threatening your well-being. But what if they try to have me committed anyway? Dr. Morrison opened her computer and began typing. I'm going to write up my evaluation findings and provide you with copies. If anyone attempts to petition for involuntary commitment, you'll have documentation from a licensed psychiatrist stating that you are mentally stable and competent. That will make their case very difficult to pursue. As she typed, I sat in stunned silence, processing everything that had just happened. I had come here expecting to be diagnosed with something, to be given medication or referred for treatment, to be told that maybe my mother was right about me. Instead, I was being told that I was the victim, not the perpetrator of a psychological crisis. Dr. Morrison, I said suddenly, can I ask you something? Of course. How long do you think this has been going on? The abuse, I mean. She stopped typing and looked at me with compassionate eyes. Based on what you've told me about your childhood, probably most of your life. The soccer team incident you described, that wasn't a mother protecting her child. That was a mother sabotaging her child's attempt at independence and autonomy. The room felt like it was spinning slightly. 26 years of my life, recontextualized in a single conversation. 26 years of believing I was fragile, incompetent, and in need of protection, when really I was being systematically undermined by the person who was supposed to nurture my growth.
I need you to understand something very important, Dr. Morrison continued. What you did today, recognizing the threat to your autonomy and taking proactive steps to protect yourself, that shows remarkable insight and strength. You didn't wait to be rescued or hope the situation would improve. You took control. She handed me a printed copy of her evaluation notes. This is your documentation. Keep it safe. And Sarah, trust your instincts. They've been right all along. As I left the hospital that evening, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. I had the proof I needed that I wasn't crazy. But I also had to face the reality that my mother's behavior was far more serious than I had ever acknowledged. The dinner invitation was still waiting, along with a family convinced of my mental illness, and a mother who would not take this development well. But for the first time in my life, I had an objective, professional opinion that validated my perception of reality. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't fragile, I wasn't the problem. And that changed everything. I sat in my car outside my mother's house at 6:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the designated dinner time, clutching Dr. Morrison's evaluation in my hands like a shield. The Tudor-style home where I had grown up looked exactly the same as always. Manicured lawn, seasonal flower arrangements in expensive planters, perfectly maintained exterior that projected an image of suburban success and stability. What looked different was my perception of it. What I had once seen as a beautiful family home now felt like a carefully constructed stage set, designed to create an illusion. Through the large bay window, I could see figures moving around the dining room. My father, Robert Williams, was setting up what looked like a small recording device on the sideboard. My grandmother, Eleanor, was arranging papers at one end of the table. Dr. Harrison was examining documents with the serious expression of someone reviewing medical files. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a tribunal. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Where are you? We're all waiting." I took a deep breath and walked to the front door.
Before I could knock, it swung open to reveal my mother's face, carefully arranged in an expression of relieved concern that I now recognized as performance art. "Sarah, sweetheart, you look terrible. Come in, we've all been so worried." She reached out to hug me, but I stepped back slightly. The small gesture didn't go unnoticed. I saw her eyes flash with something that might have been anger, before quickly returning to maternal concern. "I'm fine, Mom. Actually, I'm better than fine." As I entered the dining room, the conversation stopped abruptly. My father stood up from his chair at the head of the table, his expression serious, but not unkind. At 51, Robert Williams was a successful insurance executive who had spent my entire childhood working 60-hour weeks and leaving the emotional management of the family to my mother. He was a good man who genuinely loved me, but he had never questioned my mother's interpretations of family situations. "Sarah, honey, come sit down. We need to talk." Dr. Harrison looked up from his papers with professional concern. "Sarah, your mother has filled me in on what's been happening. I think it's wonderful that you're here. It shows you recognize you need help." I remained standing, looking around the table at the assembled intervention team. "Actually, I do have some things to share with everyone. But first, I need to know, is that recording device running?" My father looked surprised. "We thought it would be helpful to have a record of our conversation in case you don't remember things clearly later." "Turn it off." "Sarah," my mother began. "Turn it off or I leave right now." My father hesitated, then clicked off the device. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken tension. "Now," I said, pulling out Dr. Morrison's evaluation and placing it on the table. My mother's face went completely white as she recognized the hospital letterhead. "Sarah, what did you do?" "I did exactly what you've been threatening to do to me. I had myself evaluated by a psychiatrist, Dr. Catherine Morrison at Portland General Hospital. She's a licensed psychiatrist with over 20 years of experience." Dr. Harrison reached for the papers. "May I?" I nodded, watching his face as he read Dr. Morrison's findings. His eyebrows rose higher with each paragraph, and I saw him glance sharply at my mother several times. "This says you're mentally stable and competent," he said slowly. "No signs of psychosis, depression, anxiety disorders, or any other mental health conditions." "That's right." My grandmother Eleanor, who had been silent until now, spoke up in her thin, worried voice. "But doctors can be wrong, can they? Maybe this Dr. Morrison doesn't understand the full situation." "She understood enough," I replied. "I told her everything. The phone calls, the family meetings, the threats of involuntary commitment. I told her about my childhood, my work, my relationships. She said I showed remarkable insight and self-awareness." My mother had been growing increasingly agitated during this exchange. "One evaluation doesn't mean anything, Sarah. We've been watching your behavior for months. Dr. Harrison, tell her about the warning signs we discussed." Dr. Harrison looked uncomfortable. "Linda, in light of this evaluation, I think we need to reconsider our approach." "Our approach?" I asked sharply. "What approach would that be?" My father cleared his throat. "Sarah, we've been consulting with Dr. Harrison about options for getting you help, even if you don't want it. Oregon has provisions for involuntary commitment when someone poses a danger to themselves. And you think I pose a danger to myself?" My mother jumped in before anyone else could respond. "Living alone in that terrible apartment, barely eating, working all hours, isolating yourself from family. Yes, that's self-destructive behavior." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward them. "I've paid my rent every month on time. I have a growing savings account. I have 3 steady clients and 2 potential new contracts. I volunteer at the animal shelter. I maintain my apartment. I cook for myself, and I exercise regularly. Which part of that sounds self-destructive?" My Aunt Rachel, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally spoke up. But Sarah, when I saw you at the grocery store, you were talking to yourself. I was reading my shopping list out loud, which I do because it helps me stay organized and make sure I don't forget anything. It's called being methodical. You hung up on your mother this morning, my grandmother added accusingly. After she spent 15 minutes interrogating me about a business meeting and implying that I was having delusions. I looked around the table at their faces. Some looked confused, others defensive, but I could see doubt creeping in. Except for my mother. She looked furious. "You're all missing the point," Linda said, her voice rising. "She's been manipulated by this so-called doctor. Sarah is clearly having paranoid thoughts about our family. She thinks we're plotting against her." "Aren't you?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "You called my former boss to discuss my paranoid thoughts about my workplace? You organized this intervention without telling me? You researched involuntary commitment procedures. You brought a doctor to a family dinner to diagnose me? If I were actually plotting against someone and they found out about it, would that make them paranoid or would that make them observant?" Dr. Harrison set down the evaluation papers and removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly while clearly thinking. "Linda, I have to say, in retrospect, some of the behaviors you described as concerning, they might have alternative explanations. Timothy, you can't be serious. Working late hours is normal for someone building a freelance business. Wanting privacy about personal matters is normal for an adult. Even seeming withdrawn from family can be normal if the family dynamic is complicated." My mother's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. "I can't believe this. My own daughter comes home with some piece of paper from a stranger, and suddenly everyone thinks I'm the problem?" "Mom," I said gently, "Dr. Morrison didn't just give me a clean bill of mental health. She also explained something to me that I'd never understood before." I pulled out the pamphlet about psychological abuse and placed it next to the evaluation. "She said that what you've been doing to me, the constant undermining, the isolation from friends, the control over my decisions, the threats of forced treatment, these are forms of psychological abuse." The room went completely silent. My father stared at the pamphlet like it might bite him. My grandmother gasped. Dr. Harrison looked deeply uncomfortable. My mother's reaction was the most telling. Instead of shock or denial, she went on the attack. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "After everything I've done for you, all the sacrifices, all the worry, all the love, and you have the audacity to sit in my house and accuse me of abuse? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you what a medical professional observed about our family dynamic. This is exactly what I'm talking about." She turned to the others, gesturing wildly. "This is paranoid thinking. She believes trained medical professionals are more qualified to understand our family than we are." "Yes, Mom, I do believe that a psychiatrist who specializes in family dynamics might have some insight that we don't have." "You see?" she appealed to the room. "She's completely delusional." It was my father who spoke next, his voice quiet and thoughtful. "Linda, maybe we should read what this pamphlet says." "Robert, you cannot be taking her side in this." "I'm not taking sides. I'm trying to understand what's happening to our family." He picked up the pamphlet and began reading aloud. It says, "Psychological abuse often involves undermining the victim's confidence in their own perceptions, isolating them from support systems, using threats of medical or legal consequences to control behavior, characterizing normal independence as pathology." He stopped reading and looked at my mother with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, but something that might have been recognition. "Linda, this does sound familiar. Robert Williams, if you side with her against me, I will never forgive you." The threat was automatic, reflexive, and it revealed everything. At that moment, everyone in the room could see the dynamic clearly. My mother wasn't concerned about my well-being. She was concerned about losing control. My grandmother Eleanor, who had been my mother's strongest supporter, slowly shook her head. Linda dear, maybe we should listen to what Sarah is trying to tell us. Mother, not you too! I stood up, feeling suddenly exhausted but also strangely liberated. I didn't come here to attack anyone or to cause drama. I came here to show you proof that I'm not mentally ill and to ask you to stop threatening me with forced psychiatric treatment. And if you don't, my mother asked, her voice cold, then I'll use the documentation I have to protect myself. Dr. Morrison's evaluation will make any involuntary commitment petition very difficult to pursue. She's also referred me to a therapist who specializes in family trauma, so I'll have ongoing professional support. I picked up my purse and the papers from the table. I'm going home now. If anyone wants to have a normal, respectful relationship with me, one that doesn't involve medical threats or character assassination, my door is open. But I won't tolerate this kind of treatment anymore.
As I walked toward the front door, I heard my father's voice behind me. Sarah, wait! I turned back. He was standing in the doorway of the dining room, looking older and more confused than I had ever seen him. I'm sorry, he said simply. I don't understand everything that's happening, but I'm sorry we made you feel like you had to go to a hospital to prove you weren't crazy. That's not normal. Behind him, I could see my mother still sitting at the table, staring straight ahead with an expression of pure fury. My grandmother was trying to talk to her, but she wasn't responding. Dr. Harrison was gathering his papers and looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. Can we talk sometime? Just us? I'd like that. As I drove home that night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't easily sort through. Relief that I had finally confronted the situation, sadness about the family relationships that might be irreparably damaged, fear about how my mother might retaliate. But underneath it all was something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of my own power. For the first time in my life, I had evidence that my perceptions were accurate, that my feelings were valid, and that I had the right to protect myself. The psychiatric evaluation that was supposed to prove my incompetence had instead given me the tools to prove my competence. But I also knew this was just the beginning. My mother wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, and I had just humiliated her in front of the entire family. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be easy. But I was ready for it. Dr. Morrison had been right. I was stronger than I knew. The first sign that my mother wasn't going to let this go quietly came 3 days after the dinner confrontation. I was working on a logo design for my newest client when my phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of my landlord, Patricia Novak, a practical woman in her 60s who owned the converted warehouse building where I rented my studio apartment. Sarah, I need to speak with you about some concerns that have been brought to my attention, Patricia said without preamble. Her usual friendly tone was replaced by something cautious and official. My stomach dropped. What kind of concerns? I received a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother. She expressed worry about your mental state and suggested that you might be a danger to yourself or the property. She mentioned something about psychiatric episodes and erratic behavior. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of rage and helplessness wash over me. Patricia, did she provide any specific examples of dangerous behavior? She mentioned that you work at all hours, that you've been heard talking to yourself, and that your family is concerned about your stability. She also said that you've been refusing medical treatment that you desperately need. The lies were so perfectly crafted, containing just enough truth to sound plausible while being completely misleading. Yes, I worked varied hours because that's the nature of freelance work. Yes, I sometimes talked through design problems out loud because it helped me think. Yes, I had refused the medical treatment my family wanted to force on me because I didn't need it. Patricia, I understand why that call would be concerning. Can I ask you to give me a chance to respond to these allegations? There was a pause. Of course.
You've been a model tenant, Sarah, but I have to take safety concerns seriously. I explained the situation carefully, focusing on facts rather than emotions. I told her about the psychiatric evaluation, the family intervention, and my mother's pattern of manipulation. I offered to provide documentation of my mental health assessment and references from my clients about my professional behavior. I'm going to email you Dr. Morrison's evaluation right now. After you read it, if you still have concerns about my tenancy, we can discuss them. But I want you to have the full picture before making any decisions based on one phone call. Patricia was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Sarah, this is quite different from what your mother described. You sound very rational and articulate. Let me review the documentation you're sending, and we'll go from there. After hanging up, I sat staring at my computer screen, my hands shaking with adrenaline. This was exactly what Dr. Morrison had warned me about during our follow-up phone call 2 days earlier. Psychological abusers don't simply accept defeat, they escalate. They find new ways to exert control and punish the victim for resisting. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Marcus from Grounded Coffee. I need to speak with you about your project. Can you call me as soon as possible? Marcus Webb was the owner of the organic coffee shop, my first and most stable client. We had been working together for 6 months, and our professional relationship had been nothing but positive. The urgent tone of his message sent alarm bells in my head. Marcus, it's Sarah. I got your message. Is everything okay with the project? Sarah, This is awkward. I received a strange phone call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother. She said she was concerned about your mental state and thought I should know that you've been having some kind of breakdown. The pattern was becoming clear. My mother wasn't just trying to destroy my living situation, she was systematically targeting my professional relationships. She told me that your family is trying to get you psychiatric help, but that you're refusing treatment and becoming increasingly unstable. She suggested that my project might be suffering because of your condition. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Marcus, in the 6 months we've worked together, have you seen any signs of instability or unprofessional behavior from me?
No, absolutely not. That's why the call was so confusing. Your work has been excellent, you've met every deadline, and you've been completely professional in all our interactions. That's why I wanted to talk to you directly. I explained the situation to Marcus, just as I had to Patricia. I offered to provide documentation and suggested that if he had any concerns about my work quality or professionalism, we could address them based on actual evidence rather than third-party allegations. I appreciate your honesty, Sarah. To be completely frank, something about that phone call felt off to me. It seemed more like someone trying to cause problems than someone genuinely concerned about your welfare. After ending the call with Marcus, I realized I needed to get ahead of this campaign before it destroyed everything I had built. I spent the next hour calling my other clients, my volunteer coordinator at the animal shelter, and even my neighbors in the building. In each conversation, I briefly explained that they might receive phone calls about my mental health from my estranged mother, and that I was happy to provide professional documentation of my stability if needed. The responses were telling. 2 of my clients mentioned that they had already received such calls, but had dismissed them because my work spoke for itself. My volunteer coordinator at the animal shelter, Janet Rodriguez, was more direct. Sarah, I've been managing volunteers for 15 years. I can spot someone with genuine mental health issues from a mile away. You're one of the most reliable, competent people I work with. If someone called me saying you were unstable, I'd assume they were either misinformed or had ulterior motives. But it was my conversation with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived in the apartment below mine, that provided the most insight into my mother's strategy. Oh, yes, dear. A woman called yesterday, asking about you. Said she was your mother and was worried because you'd been making noise at all hours and acting strangely. I told her that was nonsense. You're quieter than a church mouse, and I've never seen you behave oddly in the year you've lived here. Did she ask anything specific about my behavior?
She wanted to know if I'd seen you talking to yourself, if you seemed paranoid or frightened, if you'd mentioned having problems with your family. Very specific questions, like she was fishing for particular answers. This confirmed what I was beginning to understand about my mother's approach. She wasn't randomly making accusations. She was conducting a systematic character assassination campaign designed to isolate me professionally and socially. She was using the mental health stigma as a weapon, knowing that even false allegations could damage relationships and opportunities. That evening, I had my first session with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the therapist Dr. Morrison had recommended. Dr. Walsh was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 40s with curly red hair and a direct, no-nonsense manner that put me immediately at ease. Dr. Morrison filled me in on your situation, she said as we settled into her comfortable office. It sounds like you've had quite a week. I told her about the landlord call, the client concerns, and my mother's apparent campaign to undermine my professional and personal relationships. This is actually a common escalation pattern in cases of family psychological abuse, Dr. Walsh explained. When the direct control methods fail, in your case, the threats of involuntary commitment, the abuser often shifts to indirect control through social and economic pressure. So this is going to get worse? It might, before it gets better. Your mother has invested decades in maintaining a particular narrative about you and your family. Having that narrative challenged publicly, especially by medical professionals, represents a significant threat to her psychological framework. Dr. Walsh leaned forward in her chair. Sarah, I want you to understand something important. Your mother's behavior isn't just controlling. It's abusive in a very specific way. She's using your own support systems against you, trying to convince the people you depend on that you can't be trusted or relied upon. But why? What does she get out of destroying my life? Control. If you can't maintain employment, you might have to move back home. If people think you're unstable, you might become isolated and dependent on family again. If your professional reputation is damaged, you might need your family's financial support. The insight hit me like a revelation. My mother wasn't trying to destroy my life out of spite. She was trying to force me back into dependence on her. Every attack on my independence was designed to make her control necessary again. The question, Dr. Walsh continued, is how far she's willing to go and what you're willing to do to protect yourself. Over the next few days, the harassment campaign intensified. My mother called the animal shelter, claiming I had been acting erratically around the animals. She contacted my former employer at the marketing firm, suggesting that my departure had been due to mental health issues rather than workplace concerns. She even called my car insurance company, claiming I had been driving recklessly due to psychological problems. Each call required me to defend myself, provide documentation, and rebuild trust that her accusations had damaged. It was exhausting and demoralizing, but it was also revealing. Every person she contacted eventually came to the same conclusion that her accusations didn't match their direct experience with me. The breakthrough came when my father called me on Friday evening. Sarah, I need to apologize to you. His voice sounded tired and older than I remembered. I could hear the weight of the week in every word. For what, Dad? For not seeing what was happening. For not questioning your mother's version of events sooner. For almost letting you be committed to a psychiatric facility when there was nothing wrong with you. I felt tears starting to form. Dad! No, let me finish. After you left on Tuesday night, I started paying attention to your mother's behavior in a way I never had before. The phone calls she's been making, the way she talks about you, the way she reacts when anyone suggests you might be right about something. He paused, and I could hear him taking a shaky breath.
Your mother called 6 different people yesterday, Sarah. 6. I listened to her describe you as delusional, dangerous, and incompetent. She was so focused on destroying your credibility that she didn't even notice I was in the room. What did you do? I confronted her. I asked her why she was trying so hard to convince everyone you were mentally ill when a doctor had just said you weren't. Do you know what she said? I waited, my heart pounding. She said that Dr. Morrison was obviously incompetent, that you had manipulated the evaluation, and that she was going to find a doctor who would give the right diagnosis. Sarah, she's not trying to help you get treatment. She's trying to shop for a diagnosis that supports what she already believes. The admission hung in the air between us like a confession. I've been married to your mother for 28 years, Sarah. I love her. But I can't pretend anymore that her behavior toward you is normal or healthy. It's not love, Sarah. I don't know what it is, but it's not love. That night, I sat in my apartment with Dr. Morrison's evaluation, Dr. Walsh's business card, and a growing collection of documentation proving my competence and stability. My mother's campaign to destroy my independence had backfired in a way she never could have anticipated. Instead of isolating me, it forced everyone in my life to examine her behavior closely. Instead of making me look unstable, it had made her look obsessive and vindictive. But I also knew this wasn't over. My mother had shown me exactly how far she was willing to go to maintain control, and it was further than I had ever imagined. The woman who had raised me, who claimed to love me, was systematically trying to destroy every aspect of my independent life. The question now wasn't whether she would escalate further, it was how I would respond when she did. Monday morning brought a phone call that changed everything. The number on my caller ID was one I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and deeply unsettling. Miss Chen Williams, this is Detective Amanda Torres with the Portland Police Department's Crisis Intervention Team. I need to speak with you about a welfare check request we received concerning your mental health and safety. My blood went cold. A welfare check? Yes, ma'am, we received a call from someone identifying herself as your mother, expressing concern that you might be experiencing a psychiatric emergency and could be a danger to yourself. She provided specific details about concerning behaviors and requested that we perform a wellness check at your residence. I sank into my desk chair, my hands trembling. My mother had escalated beyond character assassination to involving law enforcement. This wasn't just about controlling me anymore. This was about creating an official record that could follow me for years. Detective Torres, I can assure you that I'm not in crisis. In fact, I was recently evaluated by a psychiatrist who found me to be mentally stable and competent. I can provide documentation of that evaluation. That would be helpful. The caller was quite insistent and provided very detailed information about what she described as deteriorating mental health symptoms. She mentioned that you've been refusing medical treatment and that your family is concerned you might harm yourself. The specificity of the lies was breathtaking. My mother had clearly prepared for this conversation, crafting a narrative that would sound credible to law enforcement while being impossible to quickly disprove. Detective, would it be possible to meet somewhere public to discuss this? I'd prefer not to have police cars outside my building as it could damage my relationship with my landlord and neighbors. Of course. Can you meet me at the precinct this afternoon? And Miss Chen Williams, please bring any documentation you have regarding your recent psychiatric evaluation. After scheduling the meeting, I immediately called Dr. Walsh's office. Her secretary squeezed me in for an emergency session that morning, and I arrived at her office feeling like I was drowning in my mother's web of lies. This is actually a good thing, Dr. Walsh said after I explained about the police welfare check. I know it doesn't feel that way, but your mother has just made a crucial mistake. How is involving the police a mistake? Because now there will be an official record of her false allegations. Police departments take welfare checks seriously, and they also take them seriously when someone makes false reports. If you can demonstrate to Detective Torres that you're stable and competent and that your mother's claims are unfounded, she could potentially face charges for filing a false police report. Dr. Walsh helped me organize my documentation. Dr. Morrison's psychiatric evaluation, letters from my clients attesting to my professional competence, statements from my landlord and neighbors about my behavior, and even my volunteer coordinator's assessment of my reliability. Sarah, I want to suggest something that might feel uncomfortable, but could be very protective for you going forward. What? I think you should ask Detective Torres to document this interaction thoroughly and consider requesting a formal investigation into your mother's pattern of false allegations. What she's doing isn't just harassment, it's potentially criminal. The meeting at the police station was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Detective Torres was a woman in her early 40s with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything. She had the kind of calm, professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease, despite the circumstances. "Thank you for coming in, Miss Chen Williams. I want you to know that welfare checks are routine, and there's no assumption of wrongdoing on your part. We're simply following up on a concerning report." "I understand. I brought documentation that I hope will help clarify the situation." I handed her Dr. Morrison's evaluation first. She read it carefully, her eyebrows rising slightly as she took in the details. "This is from Portland General Psychiatric Emergency Department?" "Yes. I requested the evaluation myself after my family threatened to have me involuntarily committed. I wanted an objective assessment from someone who didn't know our family dynamics." Detective Torres made notes as I explained the sequence of events: the family intervention, the threats of forced commitment, my decision to seek independent evaluation, and my mother's campaign to undermine my professional and personal relationships. "Do you have documentation of these other incidents you're describing?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the detailed log I had started keeping on Dr. Walsh's advice. Every phone call, every person contacted, every allegation made, all documented with dates, times, and outcomes. "Your mother called your landlord, your clients, your volunteer organization, and your car insurance company?" Detective Torres asked, scrolling through the entries. "Yes. In each case, she made specific claims about my mental health and suggested that I was dangerous or unreliable. But in each case, the people she spoke with ultimately concluded that her allegations didn't match their direct experience with me." I handed her the letters I had collected from my clients. Detective Torres read through them methodically, and I watched her expression shift from professional neutrality to something that looked like concern. "Ms. Chen Williams, in your opinion, what is your mother's motivation for making these reports?" "Control. When I moved out and became financially independent, she lost her ability to direct my life. The psychiatric allegations seem to be an attempt to force me back into dependence on her by destroying my ability to work and live independently." Detective Torres set down the papers and looked at me directly. "I've been with the crisis intervention team for 8 years. I've seen genuine mental health emergencies, and I've also seen situations where mental health accusations are used as weapons in family disputes. Based on this documentation and our conversation, I see no evidence that you pose any danger to yourself or others." Relief flooded through me, but she wasn't finished. "However, I am concerned about the pattern of behavior you've described from your mother. Making false reports to law enforcement is a serious matter. It wastes resources that could be used for genuine emergencies, and it can cause significant harm to the person being falsely accused."
You can file a complaint for harassment and false reporting. Given the documentation you've provided, there's a strong case that your mother has engaged in a campaign of harassment designed to damage your reputation and livelihood. The idea of filing charges against my mother felt surreal, but as Detective Torres explained the potential consequences of letting this pattern continue, damaged credit, employment difficulties, housing problems, ongoing police involvement, I realized that protecting myself might require taking legal action. "There's something else you should know," Detective Torres continued. The call we received wasn't just a simple welfare check request. Your mother specifically mentioned that she was concerned you might need to be involuntarily committed, and she asked about the process for initiating that procedure. My stomach dropped. She was trying to get you to commit me? It appears so. She seemed disappointed when I explained that police don't make mental health commitments. That requires medical professionals and court proceedings. She asked several specific questions about how someone could be forced into psychiatric treatment. The conversation revealed the true scope of my mother's plan. She hadn't just been trying to damage my reputation, she had been researching ways to have me forcibly institutionalized. The welfare check wasn't about ensuring my safety. It was about creating an official record that could support future commitment proceedings. After leaving the police station, I called my father. I needed him to understand that this had moved beyond family dysfunction into potentially criminal behavior. Dad, Mom called the police on me. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. She did what? I explained about the welfare check, the meeting with Detective Torres, and my mother's apparent research into involuntary commitment procedures. Jesus, Sarah, I don't even know what to say. Dad, this isn't going to stop. She's not going to suddenly realize she's wrong and apologize. She's escalating, and next time it might be even worse. What do you want me to do? I want you to be honest with her about what you know. Tell her that the police found no evidence of mental illness. Tell her that Detective Torres is concerned about false reporting. Maybe if she understands that there could be legal consequences, she'll back off. That evening, my father called back. His voice was strained and tired. I talked to your mother about the police situation. How did she react? She said the police obviously don't understand mental health issues, that they were fooled by your manipulation just like the hospital doctor was. She said she's going to contact other authorities who might be more qualified to assess the situation. Other authorities? What does that mean? I don't know, but Sarah, I'm worried. She's not thinking rationally about this. It's like she's become obsessed with proving that you're sick. Dad, Dr. Walsh thinks Mom might have her own psychological issues that make it impossible for her to accept that she's wrong about me. Dr. Walsh? My therapist. She specializes in family trauma. She says that some people become so invested in a particular narrative that contradicting evidence doesn't change their minds, it just makes them more determined to prove they're right. My father was quiet for a long moment. Your mother scheduled an appointment with a different psychiatrist next week. She wants to bring documentation about your behavior and get a second opinion about your mental state. She can't do that! I'm an adult. She can't have me evaluated without my consent. She's not trying to have you evaluated. She's trying to get a professional opinion about whether you should be evaluated. She's shopping for a doctor who will agree with her. The realization was chilling. My mother was essentially conducting a parallel investigation, seeking medical professionals who would support her version of events without ever meeting me. If she found a doctor willing to state that my behavior warranted psychiatric intervention, she could use that opinion to support future legal action. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Okay. Do you think Mom is mentally stable? The question hung in the air between us. I could hear him breathing, thinking, struggling with the question he probably had never allowed himself to consider. I think your mother loves you, but I think her way of showing love has become unhealthy. I think she's afraid of losing control over your life, that she's lost perspective about what's actually good for you. That's not what I asked. Another long pause. No, Sarah, I don't think your mother is mentally stable. I think she needs help, but I don't think she'll ever admit that or seek it voluntarily. The conversation with my father marked a turning point. I realized that this situation wouldn't resolve through discussion, compromise, or time.
My mother had moved beyond the bounds of normal family conflict into behavior that was potentially criminal and definitely harmful. The next morning, I made 2 calls that would change the trajectory of the entire situation. The first was to Detective Torres, informing her that I wanted to file formal complaints for harassment and false reporting. The second was to an attorney who specialized in restraining orders and family law.
If my mother wanted to escalate this conflict, I was prepared to meet her escalation with legal consequences. I was done being the victim of her psychological warfare. But I also knew that taking these steps would likely provoke her into even more extreme behavior. The woman who had called the police to have me forcibly committed wasn't going to quietly accept legal restraints on her behavior. The real battle was just beginning. The courthouse steps felt surreal under the bright Oregon sunshine as I walked toward what would be the final confrontation with my mother. 3 weeks had passed since I filed the restraining order petition, and today Judge Patricia Hendricks would decide whether Linda Chen Williams had engaged in harassment severe enough to warrant legal intervention. My attorney, Margaret Foster, was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in family protection orders. She had reviewed my documentation with the thorough precision of someone who had seen too many cases like mine. "Remember," she said as we approached the building, "stick to facts. Don't let emotion drive your testimony. Your mother's attorney will try to paint you as vindictive or unstable." Inside the courtroom, I saw my mother for the first time since the disastrous family dinner. She sat with her lawyer, a well-dressed man who looked expensive and confident. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a conservative navy suit that projected respectability and maternal concern. But when our eyes met across the room, I saw something I had never seen before in her face: genuine fear. Judge Hendricks called the case, and Margaret stood to present our evidence. She methodically walked through the timeline: the family intervention, the psychiatric evaluation that cleared me, my mother's campaign of phone calls, and finally the false police report. Your Honor, what we see here is a systematic pattern of harassment designed to undermine Ms. Chen Williams' independence and livelihood. The respondent has contacted her daughter's landlord, employers, volunteer organization, and even law enforcement, making false allegations of mental illness despite having objective medical evidence to the contrary. My attorney, James Morrison, no relation to Dr. Morrison, stood for his opening statement. Your Honor, my client is a concerned mother trying to help her adult daughter who refuses to acknowledge her need for mental health treatment. Every action Mrs. Chen Williams has taken has been motivated by love and genuine concern for her daughter's welfare. When I was called to testify, I felt surprisingly calm. Months of therapy with Dr. Walsh had prepared me for this moment, not just legally, but emotionally. "Ms. Chen Williams," Margaret began, "can you tell the court about your current mental health status?" I was evaluated by Dr. Catherine Morrison at Portland General Hospital's Psychiatric Emergency Department. She found no evidence of mental illness and documented that I was stable, competent, and functioning well independently. "And how did your mother respond to this evaluation?" "She dismissed it. She told family members that Dr. Morrison was incompetent and that I had manipulated the evaluation. She then began what I can only describe as a campaign to convince everyone in my life that I was mentally unstable. I recounted the phone calls to my landlord, clients, and volunteer organization, providing specific dates and documented outcomes. The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. What was the impact of these calls on your life? I had to spend significant time defending my competency to people who had previously trusted me professionally. My landlord questioned my tenancy. My clients wondered if they could rely on me. It was humiliating and professionally damaging. When my mother's attorney cross-examined me, he tried exactly the strategy Margaret had predicted. "Ms. Chen Williams, isn't it true that you moved out of your family home abruptly and cut off contact with people who love you?" "I moved out to establish independence, which is normal for a 26-year-old adult. I didn't cut off contact. I set boundaries about acceptable treatment." "And isn't it true that you've been struggling financially and living in substandard conditions?"
I rent a studio apartment that I can afford on my freelance income. Living within my means while building a business isn't struggling, it's responsible financial management. Don't you think it's possible that your mother's concerns are legitimate, even if you don't see them that way? I looked directly at him. If my mother's concerns were legitimate, why did a licensed psychiatrist find no evidence to support them? Why did every person she contacted ultimately conclude that her allegations didn't match their direct experience with me? When my mother took the stand, I watched her perform the role she had perfected over decades, the loving, worried mother driven to desperate measures by her daughter's illness. Mrs. Chen Williams, can you explain your concerns about your daughter? Her attorney began. Sarah has always been fragile, but in the past year, her behavior has become increasingly concerning. She isolated herself from family, quit her stable job to pursue a realistic freelance career, and shows signs of paranoid thinking about our family's motivations. What specific behaviors worried you? She works at all hours. She talks to herself. She refuses reasonable family contact, and she's become convinced that we're trying to harm her when we're only trying to help her. It was masterfully done. Every fact twisted just enough to sound alarming while remaining technically true. But Margaret's cross-examination revealed the cracks in my mother's narrative. Mrs. Chen Williams, you called the Portland police and requested a welfare check on your daughter, correct? Yes, I was concerned for her safety. Did you tell the police that you believed she needed to be involuntarily committed? A pause. I may have mentioned that as a possibility.
I wanted to understand what options were available to help my daughter. Help her or control her? Objection, Morrison called out. Sustained, Judge Hendricks replied. Margaret pulled out the police report. According to Detective Torres, you seemed disappointed when she explained that police don't initiate psychiatric commitments. You asked specific questions about how someone could be forced into treatment. Is that accurate? I was seeking information about how to help my daughter. Mrs. Chen Williams, when Detective Torres found no evidence to support your allegations and documented that your daughter was stable and competent, did that change your opinion about her mental health? Another pause, longer this time. I believe the detective was misled, just as the hospital doctor was misled. So when professional after professional contradicts your assessment, your conclusion is that they're all wrong and you're right? I know my daughter better than strangers do. Better than trained medical professionals? Objection! Argumentative. Withdrawn. No further questions. The turning point came when Detective Torres testified about the welfare check and the pattern of false reporting. Her professional assessment carried weight that no family testimony could match. In my professional opinion, based on my conversation with Miss Chen Williams and the documentation she provided, there was no evidence of mental health crisis or dangerous behavior. However, the pattern of false reports from the mother was concerning enough that I recommended she consider filing harassment charges. Judge Hendricks asked the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Detective Torres, in your experience, when someone continues to make allegations that are repeatedly disproven by professionals, what does that suggest? It suggests that the person making the allegations may have motivations other than genuine concern. In domestic situations, false mental health allegations are sometimes used as tools of control or retaliation. After closing arguments, Judge Hendricks recessed for 30 minutes to review the evidence. When she returned, her expression was grave. This case presents a troubling pattern of behavior that goes beyond typical family disagreement. The evidence shows that Miss Sarah Chen Williams is a mentally stable, competent adult who functions successfully in her personal and professional life.
Multiple professionals have confirmed this assessment. However, Mrs. Linda Chen Williams has persistently made false allegations about her daughter's mental health to landlords, employers, volunteer organizations, and law enforcement, despite having objective evidence that contradicts these claims. The court finds that this pattern constitutes harassment and stalking under Oregon law. Mrs. Chen Williams is hereby enjoined from contacting her daughter directly or indirectly, from making any statements about her daughter's mental health to third parties, and from initiating any welfare checks or medical evaluations concerning her daughter. Furthermore, the court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible prosecution for filing false police reports. As the gavel fell, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete vindication. Not just from my family, but from the legal system itself. My perceptions had been validated, my competence confirmed, and my right to independence legally protected. My mother's face was ashen as she left the courtroom. For the first time in my life, she had been held accountable by an authority she couldn't manipulate or control. 6 months later, I received a letter from my father. He had filed for divorce and was seeking therapy to understand how he had enabled my mother's behavior for so many years. He wanted to rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. My freelance business was thriving. I had moved to a larger apartment and was considering hiring an assistant. Most importantly, I was building relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. The restraining order still stands. My mother never contacted me directly again, though I heard through my father that she continued to insist to anyone who would listen that I was mentally ill and had somehow deceived the entire legal system. But her opinion no longer mattered. I had learned the most important lesson of my life, that the truth, properly documented and presented, could overcome even the most persistent lies. The psychiatric evaluation that was supposed to prove my incompetence had instead given me the tools to prove my competence and expose the real psychological crisis in our family. It wasn't mine. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.